Well, welcome back to In the Word. Glad you're back with us. We're in Jeremiah chapter 49 today. As you read through the chapter, I want to remind you that we're in a section that began with a description of the destruction that's going to be coming on the nations around Israel. Now, Israel has been destroyed and taken into exile, first in 722 BC by the Amorites, and then I don't think that's right, not the Amorites, the Assyrians, and then taken again captive in 586 finally by the Babylonians in the southern kingdom, and Jerusalem destroyed. God destroyed them as a lesson for their willful disobedience of his law, specifically in Deuteronomy. Jeremiah continuously calls Israel back to observance of the law. He judges the nations around Israel on the basis of how they treated Israel. This is from the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, and specifically in verse 3 where it says, those who mistreat you, essentially those who curse you, I will curse, and those who bless you, I will bless. So we see these results of this, God's cursing coming on the nations around Israel. That's what this whole final section is about. Jeremiah 49 covers the destruction of several kingdoms: Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Kedar and Hazor, and Elam. We'll discuss those a little bit. And then what the application is for us in the church age. So when we've looked at verses 1 through 6, we see the destruction of Ammon here. Now, Ammon is an area that's east of the Jordan River. Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh all had land in that area east of the Jordan River. And when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and took Judah into exile, Ammon saw their chance and grabbed that area that was allocated to Israel. Did that about 582 BC. So God is going to bring judgment on them for doing that. We see a reference, as I mentioned before, to an Ammonite god, Malcolm, in verses 2 and 3. In the ancient Near East, the thought was that if a country was conquering another country, that means that in the supernatural realm, the conquering country's god was defeating the god of the country that was being conquered. So God is saying that Malcolm thought that he was victorious, but we'll find out that it's the God of Israel that's ultimately in power. Now, be careful with these things. This does not mean that the God of the Bible is testifying that a God like Malcolm exists, or that he is at war with Malcolm. No, God is speaking to us and speaking to the people of the ancient Near East in ways that they would understand. And he's communicating to them that he is the all-powerful God, that there is no God that can stand before him, that he is to be worshipped above all other gods. Verses 4 and 5 talks about the valleys flowing. This is talking about the valleys of that area are going to be flowing with Ammonite blood. Terror will come from every direction, and they're going to be overwhelmed. But surprisingly, as in Jeremiah 48:47, just as Moab was restored in the last days, so will Ammon be restored as well. This was partially completed under Cyrus, the Persian king, but ultimately will be completed when the Messianic kingdom is established. Verses 7 to 22, God turns his attention from the Ammonites to the Edomites. You might want to consult a short book of Obadiah, also a prophecy of judgment against Edom. The Edomites were descendants of Esau, and they settled in this desert area south of the Dead Sea. Verses 7 to 11 make it very clear that God himself will strip this nation bare and utterly destroy it. It's God's hand behind them that's doing the work. Verses 12 through 13 refers to those who were not sentenced. Well, who is he talking about here? He's talking about Israel, God's covenant people. Essentially saying in these verses that if I did this, if I destroyed them and sent them away from their land, and they were not under my judgment, but they're my covenant people, just think of what I will do to you who are under my final judgment. Verses 14 through 16 then talk about the cause of Edom's destruction. It's their arrogance and their pride. Edom is in a mountainous area. It's the area of Petra. They thought they were safe in this mountain fortress. But God says he's going to bring them down from there. They can't hide from anyone, but they can't hide from God particularly. And 17 through 22 talks about the completeness of the destruction. Edom's going to be so completely destroyed that they're going to become an object lesson to all the nations around them. This nation is now the area of Jordan, just east of Jerusalem, east of Judah. Damascus is on the Mediterranean coast, and God turns his attention to Damascus in verses 23 through 27. Hamath and Arpad are cities north and south of Damascus. They're going to be caught up in the destruction of the city, and when the residents of Damascus see these nations or these cities destroyed, it's a harbinger for what's going to come upon them. It's a warning. Verse 25 refers to the city of praise. This could be easily translated the city of renown or the prominent city. It's a reference to Damascus here. Don't let that confuse you. And in verses 26 through 27, we see death and destruction are in the future of Damascus. It's coming upon them. Come to verses 28 to 33 near the end of the chapter, and we're talking about, the attention turns to Kedar and Hazor. These were, I don't know if they're really called nations as much as Bedouin communities that circulated or traveled in areas east and north of Judah. These communities were devastated really by Nebuchadnezzar while he was en route to Jerusalem from Babylon. And then the destruction of these tribes, the destruction of these areas, is actually recorded outside the Bible. So we have confirmation that this happened in a document that's known, an ancient document known as the Babylonian Chronicles. Finally, in verses 34 through 39, we come to Elam. Elam. Now, this prophecy is made, tells you in verse 34 when it was made. If we translate that, it's basically about the year 597. This area of Elam was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar in about 596, so a year later. And then again it was conquered by Cyrus of Persia in 539. Elam's an area that's east of Babylon and west of the Tigris River in the area of Syria today. Verse 39 says that this area will be restored, this nation will be restored in the last days, that is at the end of history. In Acts chapter 2 verse 9, the Elamites are present when Peter preaches, and on the day of Pentecost. So interestingly, we wonder about what is the application for the church today. Why, when we read about these ancient events, these end prophecies, not only do we draw confidence from God's word that he will do exactly what he said he would do, but I think our minds turn to a rhetorical question, really, that Peter asked in 1 Peter 4:17. He asked there, if judgment begins with the household of God, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? I think we could see the answer to that church age question by looking at what happened to the nations who rejected God and his people in chapter 49 of Jeremiah. Just as destruction fell on those nations, so tribulation and ultimate destruction is going to fall on the nations of the earth at the end of history. I pray that you and I and everyone who counts themselves as members of the church be urgent in evangelism while there's still time. We could see from Jeremiah the horrible destruction that fell on these nations. And we got God's promises, particularly in Revelation chapter 6 through 19, of the destruction, the end time destruction, the end of history destruction that's going to fall on the earth. So may we be evangelizing these nations while there's still time, and may the Lord be saving people from the destruction that's coming. God bless you, brothers and sisters. I pray that you are finding the study of Jeremiah rich and enriching, and that you are encouraged and edified as you learn more and more about Jeremiah and how it applies to the church today. God bless you.